Higher consciousness. Many people have looked at the problem of the fourth dimension. Fetcher wrote a great deal about the subject, and from his discussions about worlds of 1, 2, 3, and 4 dimensions there follows an interesting method of investigating the fourth dimension by means of building up analogies between worlds of different dimensions. For example, between an imaginary world on a plane and the three-dimensional world. Between the three-dimensional world and the world of 4 dimensions. This method is used by nearly all those who have studied the problem of higher dimensions, and we shall have occasion to meet with it further on. Professor Johann Zollner evolved a theory of the fourth dimension from observations of mediumistic phenomena, chiefly the phenomena of so-called materialization. However, his observations have long been considered doubtful because of the insufficiently strict arrangement of his experiments. See also the scholarly articles of Podmore and Hislop. An interesting summary of almost all written about the fourth dimension up to the 1890s is to be found in the books of Ch. Hinton. These contain many of Hinton's own ideas, but unfortunately alongside valuable concept there lies a great deal of unnecessary dialectic, such as accumulate around the question of the fourth dimension. Hinton makes several attempts at a definition of the fourth dimension from the physical aspect, as well as from the psychological. Considerable space is occupied in his writing by the description of a method, invented by him of accustoming the mind to cognition of the fourth dimension. It consists of a long series of exercises for the perceiving and visualizing apparatus, with sets of different colored cubes that are meant to be memorized. First in one position, then in another, then in a third, and thereafter in several different combinations. The fundamental idea that guided Hinton in the creation of this method is that an awakening of higher consciousness requires the casting out of self in any visualization, and then cognition of the world or global consciousness. A training, to know and conceive the world not from a personal point of view as we generally know and conceive it, but as it truly is. For this, it is necessary first of all to learn to visualize things not as they appear to us, but as they actually exist, even if only in geometrical sense. External considering versus internal considering. From this there must develop the capacity to know things or to see things as they are, also from other points of view aside from the geometrical. The first exercise suggested by Hinton consists of the study of a cube composed of 27 smaller cubes colored differently and bearing definite names. After having thoroughly learned the cube made up of smaller cubes, it has to be turned over, learned and memorized in the reverse order. Then the position of the smaller cubes has to be changed and memorized in that order, and so on. As a result, according to Hinton, it is possible to cast out in the cube studied, the concepts up and down, right or left, and so on. Then to know it independently of the position with regard to one another of the smaller cubes composing it, i.e. probably to visualize it simultaneously in different combinations. This would be the first step towards casting out the self-elements in the concepts of the cube. Further on there is described an elaborate system of exercises with series of differently colored and differently named cubes, out of which various figures are composed. All this has the same purpose, to cast out the self-elements of percepts and in this way develop higher consciousness. Casting out the self-elements in percepts, according to Hinton's idea, is the first step towards the development of higher consciousness and towards a cognition of the fourth dimension. He says that if there exists the capacity of vision in the fourth dimension, that is, if we are able to see objects of our world as if from the fourth dimension, then we shall see them not as we see them in the ordinary way, but quite differently. We usually see objects as either above or below us, or on the same level, to the right or to the left, behind us or in front of us, and always from one side only, the one facing us and in perspective. Our eye is an imperfect instrument as it gives an incorrect picture of the world. What we call perspective is in reality a distortion of visible objects, which is produced by a badly constructed optical instrument, the eye. We see all objects distorted and visualize them in the same way. Visualizing them in this way due to the habit of seeing them distorted, that is owing to the habit created by our defective vision which has weakened the capacity of visualization. According to Hinton, it is unnecessary to visualize objects of the external world in a distorted form. The power of visualization is not limited by the power of vision. We see objects distorted but we know them as they are, and so can free ourselves from the habit of visualizing objects as we see them. We can learn to visualize them as we know they really are. Hinton's idea is that before developing the capacity of seeing in the fourth dimension, we must learn to visualize objects as they would be seen from the fourth dimension, i.e. not in perspective but from all sides at once, as they are known to our consciousness. The development of this power to visualize objects from all sides would be the casting out of the self-elements in mental imaging. According to Hinton, casting out the self-elements in mental images must lead to casting out the self-images of perception. In this way, the development of the power to visualize objects from all sides will be the first step towards the development of the power to see things as they are in a geometrical sense. What Hinton calls a higher consciousness. In all of this there is a great deal that is right, but also a great deal that is arbitrary and artificial. Firstly, Hinton does not take into consideration the difference between the various psychic types of men. A method that might prove satisfactory for him may produce no results or even contrary results for other people. Secondly, the very psychological foundation of his system of exercises is too unstable. He does not know when to stop, carries his analogues too far, and in that way deprives many of his conclusions of value. From the point of view of geometry, according to Hinton, the question of the fourth dimension may be examined in the following way. We know geometrical figures of three kinds. Figures of one dimension or lines. Figures of two dimensions or planes. Figures of three dimensions or solids. A line is regarded here as a trace of a point moving in space. A plane is the trace of a line moving in space, and a solid, the trace of a plane moving in space. Imagine then a straight line limited by 2 points, and let's designate this line by the letter A. Let's then imagine this line A moving through space in a different perpendicular to itself, and leaving a trace of its movement, like a smoke trail. When it has traversed a distance equal to its length, the trace or trail left by it will have the form of a square, the sides of which are equal to a line A, i.e. A squared. Imagine then this square moving in space in a different perpendicular to two of its adjoining sides and leaving a trace or smoke trail of its movement. When it has traversed a distance equal to the length of one of the sides of the square, its trace will have the form of a cube, i.e. A cubed. Now if we imagine the movement of a cube in space, what form will the trace left by such a movement, i.e. figure A to the fourth power, assume? Examining the correlations of figures of 1, 2, and 3 dimensions, i.e. lines, planes and solids, we can deduce the rule that a figure of a higher dimension can be regarded as the trace of the movement of a lower dimension. On the basis of this rule, we may regard figure A to the power of 4 as the trace of the movement of a cube in space. But what is the movement of a cube in space, the trace of which becomes a figure of 4 dimensions? If we examine the way in which figures of higher dimensions are constructed by the movement of figures of lower dimensions, we discover several common properties and several common laws in these formations. When we consider a square as the trace of the movement of a line, we know that all the points of this line have moved in space. When we consider a cube as the trace of the movement of a square, we know that all the points of the square have moved. Furthermore, the line moves in a direction perpendicular to itself, the square in a direction perpendicular to two of its dimensions. Consequently, if we consider the figure A to the fourth power as the trace of the movement of a cube in space, we must remember that all the points of the given cube have moved in space. We may deduce from analogy with the above, that the cube was moving in space in a direction that is not contained in the cube itself, i.e. a direction perpendicular to its 3 dimensions. This direction then would be the fourth perpendicular unknown to us in our space and in our geometry of 3 dimensions. Further, we may determine a line as an infinite number of points, a square as an infinite number of lines, and a cube as an infinite number of squares. By analogy, we may therefore determine the figure A to the fourth power as an infinite number of cubes. Looking at the square, we see nothing but lines. Looking at the cube, we see its surfaces, or possibly even only one of its surfaces. It is quite possible that the figure A to the power of 4 would appear to us as a cube, or to put it in a different way, a cube is what we see of the figure A to the fourth power. A point may be determined as a cross-section of a line as a cross-section of a surface, and a surface as a cross-section of a solid. A three-dimensional body can therefore be determined as a cross-section of a four-dimensional body. Generally speaking, in every four-dimensional body we shall see its three-dimensional projection or section, i.e. a cube, a sphere, a pyramid, a cone, a cylinder that may be projections or cross-sections of four-dimensional bodies unknown to us. In 1908 an article on the fourth dimension was published in the review Souvremeni Mir. It was extracted from a letter written by N. A. Morozov, a scientist by education who belonged to the revolutionary parties of the 1870s and 80s, who was arrested in connection with the murder of the Emperor Alexander II, then spent 23 years in prisons, chiefly in the fortress of Schlüsselburg. Liberated in 1905, he wrote several books, one on the revelation of St. John, another on alchemy, on magic and so on, which found readership in the period before the war. It was curious that the public liked in Morozov's books not what he actually wrote, but what he wrote about. His real intentions were very limited and in strict accordance with the scientific ideas of the 1870s. He tried to present mystical subjects rationally. For example, he explained the revelation as simply a description of a thunderstorm. But being a good writer, Morozov gave a very vivid exposition of his themes and sometimes added little-known material. His books therefore produced a quite unexpected result, and many people became interested in mystical subjects and in reading mystical literature. After the revolution, Morozov joined the Bolsheviks and remained in Russia. The letter to his fellow prisoners in the fortress of Schlüsselburg is of interest chiefly because it contains, in a very picturesque form, an exposition of the fundamental proposition of a method of reasoning about the fourth dimension by means of analogies. In the final conclusions of Morozov's article, as to what may exist in the domain of the fourth dimension, he deviates from the method of analogies and assigns to the fourth dimension the spirits that spiritualists evoke in their seances. Then, having denied the existence of spirits, he denies the objective meaning of the fourth dimension. It is generally supposed that fortress walls do not exist in the fourth dimension, and that was probably why the fourth dimension was one of the favorite subjects of conversation held at Schlüsselburg by means of tapping. N. A. Morozov's letter is in answer to questions put to him in one of these conversations. He writes, "My dear friends, our short Schlüsselburg summer is nearing its end, and the dark, mysterious autumn nights are coming. In these nights, spreading like a black cloak over the roof of our prison and enveloping with impenetrable darkness our little island with its old towers and bastions, it would seem that the shadows of our friends and predecessors who perished here flit invisibly about these walls, looking at us through the windows and entering into mysterious communication with those who still live. We ourselves, are we not but shadows of what we used to be? Are we not transformed into some kind of tapping spirits, conversing unseen with one another through the stone walls that divide us, like those that perform spiritualistic seances? All day long I have thought of your discussion of today about the fourth, the fifth or other dimensions of the space of the universe that are inaccessible to us. With all my power I have tried to imagine at least the fourth dimension of the world. The one in which, as metaphysicians affirm, everything that is under lock and key may suddenly appear open, and in which all confined spaces can be entered into by beings able to move not only along our three dimensions, but also along the fourth, to which we are unaccustomed. You ask me for scientific examination of the problem. But let us speak first of the world of only two dimensions, and later we will see whether it will give us the possibility of drawing certain conclusions about different worlds. Let us take a certain plane, for instance, that which separates the surface of Lake Ladoga, which surrounds us, from the atmosphere above it, in this quiet autumn evening. Let us suppose that this plane is a separate world of two dimensions, peopled with its own beings that can move about only on this plane, like the shadows of swallows and seagulls flitting in all directions over the smooth surface of the water that surrounds us, but remains forever hidden from us behind these battlements. Let us suppose that, having escaped from behind our Schlüsselburg bastions, you went for a bathe in the lake. As beings of three dimensions you also have two dimensions that lie upon the surface of the water. You will occupy a definite place in the world of shadow beings. All the parts of your body above and below the level of the water will be imperceptible to them, and they will be aware of nothing but your contour, which is outlined by the surface of the lake. Your contour must appear to them as an object of their own world, only very astonishing and miraculous. the first miracle from their point of view will be your sudden appearance in their midst. It can be said with full conviction that the effect you would create would be in no way inferior to the unexpected appearance among ourselves of some ghost from the unknown world. The second miracle will be the surprising changeability of your external form. When you are immersed up to your waist, your form will be for them almost elliptical, because only the line on the surface surrounding your waist and impenetrable for them will be perceptible to them. When you begin to swim, you will assume in their eyes the outline of a man. When you wade into a shallow place so that the surface upon which they live encircles your legs, you will appear to them transformed into two ring-shaped beings. If desirous of keeping you in one place, they surround you on all sides. You can step over them and find yourself free from them in a way quite inconceivable to them. In their eyes you would be all-powerful beings, inhabitants of a higher world, similar to those supernatural beings about whom theologians and metaphysicians tell us. Now, if we suppose that apart from these two worlds, the plane world and the world we all live in, there exists a world of 4 dimensions, superior to ours, it will become clear that in relation to us, its inhabitants would be exactly the same as we are in relation to the inhabitants of a plane. They must appear in our midst in the same unexpected way and disappear from our world at their will, moving along the 4th or some higher dimension. In a word, the analogy so far is complete. Further, we shall find in the same analogy a complete refutation of all our hypotheses. If indeed the beings of the 4-dimensional world were only purely our invention, their appearance in our midst would be an ordinary, everyday occurrence. Further, Morozov discusses whether we have any reason to suppose that supernatural beings really exist, and he comes to the conclusion that we have no grounds for such a hypothesis unless we are prepared to believe in fairy tales. The only indication worthy of our attention of the existence of such beings can be found, according to Morozov, in the teachings of spiritualism. However, his own experience in spiritualism convinced him that in spite of the strange phenomena that undoubtedly occur at spiritualistic seances, spirits take no part in them. So-called automatic writing, usually cited as proof of the cooperation of intelligent forces of another world at these seances, is according to his observation a result of thought reading. Consciously or unconsciously, a medium simply reads the thoughts of those present and from these thoughts obtains the answers to their questions. Morozov attended many seances, but never met with a case where there was anything in the answers received that was not known to any of the people present, or where answers were in a language unknown to any present. Therefore, though not doubting the sincerity of the majority of spiritualists, Morozov concludes that spirits have nothing to do with phenomena at seances. His experience of spiritualism, he says, had convinced him many years previously that the phenomena which he assigned to the 4th dimension do not really exist. He says that at such spiritualistic seances answers are given unconsciously by the actual people present, and that therefore all suppositions concerning the existence of the 4th dimension are pure imagination. The conclusions of Morozov are quite unexpected, and it is difficult to understand how they were arrived at. Nothing can be said against his opinion of spiritualism. The psychic side of spiritualistic phenomena is undoubtedly quite subjective. However, it is incomprehensible why Morozov sees the 4th dimension in spiritual phenomena alone, and why, denying the spirits, he denies the 4th dimension. This looks like a ready-made solution offered by that official positivism to which Morozov adhered and from which he was unable to depart. His previous arguments led in quite another direction. Aside from spirits, there exist a number of phenomena altogether real to us, i.e. of usual and everyday occurrence, but absolutely inexplicable without the help of hypotheses that would relate to these phenomena with the world of the 4th dimension. We are, however, too accustomed to these phenomena and do not notice their miraculous nature, and do not notice that we live in a world of perpetual miracle, in a world of the mysterious, the inexplicable, and above all the unmeasurable. Morozov describes how miraculous our 3-dimensional bodies would seem to the plane beings, how these beings would not know whence our bodies come, and whither do they disappear, like spirits appearing from an unknown world. But in reality, are we not beings just as fantastic and as changeable in our appearance for any stationary object, a stone or a tree? Further, do we not possess the properties of higher beings for animals? Are there no phenomena for us, for instance all the manifestations of life, about which we do not know whence they come nor whither they go? Phenomena such as the appearance of a plant from a seed, the birth of living things and the like. Further, the phenomena of thunderstorms, rain, spring, autumn, that we can neither explain nor interpret. Is not each of these phenomena of nature taken separately something of which we can feel only a little, touch only a part, like the blind men in old Eastern fable who defined an elephant each in his own way, one by its legs, one by its ears, a third by its tail? Continuing Morozov's reasoning concerning the relations between the world of 3 dimensions and the world of 4 dimensions, we have no grounds for looking for the latter only in the domain of spiritualism.